That's the reading of his word. I am not Dan Kolansky. However, I am going to introduce him. Some of you guys know, most of you guys know, Dan has been studiously undertaking some things in New York recently, and I think this is the first time he's actually giving a message, and I'm actually really excited about it because I talked to Neil about some of it earlier. So, yeah, welcome Dan for the first time. Yay, Dan.
Yeah, it looks a lot different from this side. Yeah, I would think so. It was kind of funny the way Neil asked me to speak, because about 2 weeks ago he came up to me and he was like, Dan, I have a question for you. And he called me the night before I missed the call. And it was very serious the way that he said it. He was like, Dan, I want you to, there we go. I want you to pray about this before I ask the question. It's like, not pray before, but he's like, I want you to pray about this. I don't want an answer. I'm going to ask you this question, and it's an important question. And I'm thinking to myself, what could he possibly be asking me that's this important? You know, like I'm trying to go through my head. It's like, is he going to ask me for take his test for him in Old Testament survey? Or like, what? I know, right? I'm like thinking, what could possibly be this important? And then he says, Dan, 2 weeks from now, I'm not going to be here. And I was wondering if you wanted to speak. And I'm thinking, yes. It wasn't that I hadn't prayed about it already. I've been praying about this since May, when I first was feeling called to go to seminary. So it was like, okay, this is good. This is finally an opportunity it'll be good. And it's not like I was sitting here waiting for an opportunity to speak, but when it came up, it was like, this is good. So I said, okay, I'll go back and pray. I'm thinking I'll play it cool. And, yeah, you can. Well, it's recorded too now. I guess I'm in trouble. So I go home and I tell Kristen, and I did pray. I was like, I am going to pray because I want to make sure that this is actually from the God and it's not just me, because I like to get excited about what's going on in my life. And I saw Neil 3 days later because it was during the high holiday season, so you meet for services every 24 hours. And so I saw him, and before the service started, I was going to talk to him afterwards, but before the service started, he said, so what do you think about what I said? And I said, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing this. This will be good. So it was fun. So let's see if we can pull this up. I actually wrote a PowerPoint, I hope. Can we click that on? I tried to click it, but it didn't work. I had to write a PowerPoint because I know that if I didn't, I'm going to just go all the way off the rails. So this is my PowerPoint. I put my notes on my tablet. I was going to print paper, but I couldn't find a printer. And so we're going paperless. So if my notes crash halfway through the service, that should be kind of funny. So the first message that I'm ever going to give is the whole plan. Whose plan? God's plan. His whole plan, A to Z. I figure if I do this right, I'll never have to speak again. You can just put this on replay because it's the whole plan. Okay. Very, very true. But this was actually pulled from today's reading. So for those of you who don't know, we follow a reading cycle at Sar Shalom. This was a reading cycle that was set up in the Jewish community. And so every week they have a parsha, or a portion. They read a portion. And today's parsha is Parsha Noach, which is Noah. And Parsha Noach covers a couple key events. It covers the ark and the flood. It covers the curse of Ham. For those of you that remember that, is where Ham sees Noah naked and tells his brothers about it, and then Noah curses him because of that. Instead of doing something about it, he just goes and tells his brothers, hey, have you seen my dad? It's pretty crazy. It has the Tower of Babel in this portion. It also covers the beginning of Abraham's life a little bit. And it also covers Isaiah chapter 66, which is apocalyptic literature. It's the end times. I've been starting to call it the Cliff Notes to Revelation, because that's really what it is. It's really quite amazing. And then there's also Matthew chapter 24, which is Yeshua's talking about the end times. So let me see if I can click now. So I saw this on Facebook. I got a kick out of this. The big message today is about perspective. And sometimes our perspective can be a little bit skewed, just a smidge. It's Hebrew National. It was a Hebrew National hot dog. That's what makes it okay. Our God is a God of promise. He's given us his plan, and even though it may not always feel like it, we have it all written down. And so it's kind of interesting. So now one of the classes that I'm in is Old Testament survey. And it's been really cool seeing the Bible from such a high angle, and that's what I'm going to try and kind of put into perspective today. Because when they tell you that you're going to read the entire Old Testament from A to Z in 3 months, that's intense. It's like you're going through it, and like right now I'm in the middle of Chronicles, even though I'm supposed to be like 3 books ahead. But I'm in the middle of Chronicles, and I'm listening. I've been doing it on book on tape, but I'm listening to this, and I'm because it's so fresh. You start to think about what is what you're reading in light of what you have read already. So in Chronicles we're talking about the kings of Israel, and you're listening to or you're thinking about Moses. When they say we found the book of the law written by Moses, you're saying, well, that was just last week, Well, for these guys, it was hundreds of years, so it's really quite interesting where you get to pull your head up and you think about this. So anyway, I've been in this Old Testament class, but this is not the first time I've taken an Old Testament survey. Or college level, the last time I took it was at Milligan College. It was for my undergrad degree, and it was kind of interesting because they did not believe that large portions of the Old Testament were true. So, their thought is that, and Genesis was the chief victim of this. You look in the book of Genesis. Genesis is probably the most contested book of the Old Testament as far as its authenticity. And it was interesting listening to it. I mean, they labeled it all kinds of things. Political satire was a big one, because they said, oh yeah, the nations came from Lot's daughters. They thought that was a big one. But they thought that half of these stories were made up. And I've had to come to terms with that a little bit, and I have to give them a little bit of grace, even though I do believe that everything written in there really did transpire. It's so far in the past. I mean, when you think about it, by the time Moses is attributed with writing Genesis, right? By the time Moses wrote Genesis, the flood had happened 1,000 years in the past, give or take a century or so. It was old. And this was ancient history by the time Moses was writing it down. Chances are he had a book that he copied it from or learned it from and was transposing it. So, reaching back that far is hard. So it's easy to just say, hey, this was made up. It's a lot easier to think of it that way. But when you start to put it all together, you start to see this thread of truth. And it pulls together, it's like a necklace where, if you're pulling it together, you have one bead and then another bead and then another bead and then another bead. And it adds up. This is an additive book. It's not a book that just has one piece to it, And a lot of people like to grab on to the New Covenant partly because it's the closest thing to us. This is the closest piece that was written to who we are. And so it's easy to, because we can understand the culture a little bit better, even though there's still major differences. We can understand the language a little bit better. And so it's easy to grab onto that and say, hey, this makes sense to me. All that stuff about Noah and the flood, and that's great, but that's so far away. It doesn't really make sense to me anymore. And so we grab onto it. And what's interesting is that as you start to read through it, you start to see that God is repeating a message. He says it over and over and over again. And the message is to different people at different times. So when you when you read the New Covenant, sure, you can read Revelation, you can read Matthew 24 and learn about the end times. But the end times had already been prophesied about. This was not the first time that it had been prophesied about. So it's really quite amazing where you start to see this. And it's written to different people, and it gives a different perspective, which, again, widens our view of what Scripture is. So So we have this message coming to us from Noah, kind of coming out of the mists of time. I was so flamboyant in my notes. But the message is just as fresh now. You know, it's a message that is happening today. And one of the things that's going to be cool is I'm going to